And one time I had this long conversation with Dan Aykroyd about UFOs, and I thought it was like Einstein was hiding inside of a comic genius, just so that if he told us the real truth, you wouldn't have to believe it. If Einstein had told us UFOs were real, would we have believed him? He never spoke about it. But Dan Aykroyd speaks about UFOs as if he were a full professor on the subject. So Dan, how did you get started in UFOs? What sparked your interest? What was the first thing that you can remember that happened to you that made you, ponder the question?
Well, I was born in July 1952, and I guess about maybe when I was 8 years old, I found a magazine, a Life magazine, with a picture of the UFOs from that sighting on the cover, with a big inquiry. What are these UFOs? And so that kind of started it as a kid, and I asked my parents about it, and they actually couldn't tell me what they were because they didn't know. They knew there was some mystery there. Then I saw The Day the Earth Stood Still as a kid, and I mean, that was a film that directly related to maybe some of the motives for visitations from other planets. And it certainly seems accurate today if you look at the way mankind in the last 100 years has basically started to turn this planet into a cinder. 3-4 holes in the ozone layer because of industrial production around the world, nuclear testing, wars. I'm just sure, just in theory, if there were another species in the universe monitoring us or near us, they would be very interested in what we're doing to this planet, to this planet's atmosphere, and to possibly neighboring bodies. So there would be a concern there. And I think that in terms of the extraterrestrial machines that are coming and going, that may be a part of their motivation.
We've just had a rash of sightings all over the planet, and we've got Iran and Turkey and Mexico. I mean, it seems like we're being invaded by UFOs. Let's talk first just about what's actually happening out there.
Well, recently, the most dynamic sighting that we've seen, because it's corroborated by an actual government, is the sighting that took place over Mexico recently, where a drug surveillance twin-engine turboprop plane was at altitude taking pictures of possible smuggling routes, and they photographed with their infrared cameras 11 unidentified objects. Some of them were in pairs and in threes, and of course, these were objects that couldn't be seen by the naked eye, but were visible on the infrared cameras. Well, the United States Air Force, after the news appeared in America, and it was covered on CNN and Fox. The footage was shown on Fox. It was shown on CNN, and in the Valley Daily News on the front page had a big headline, UFOs with a question mark, and it had pictures from that sighting. And of course, the United States Air Force had to respond, and they said it was swamp gas. So I don't know whether swamp gas is not visible to the naked eye and visible on infrared, whether it comes in multiple balls, whether swamp gas is capable of doing a complete circuit around an aircraft and then taking off at high speed and right angles into the sky. If it is, then maybe it was swamp gas. But somehow this seems to be a legitimate one, because the Mexican government decided we want to release this to the world. And this follows on the heels of the Belgian general who revealed some F-15 footage years ago of his Air Force planes chasing objects that were exceeding them in speed by twice again what his planes were going at. The French government over the last couple of years has released a comprehensive study on the UFOs. The Soviets have been since the 1950s engaged in numerous studies about landings, abductions, and the sightings. So we do have legitimate government inquiry going on, and in fact, as anyone in the field knows, the United States government for years has been covering this issue because they were compelled to cover it, because of Ken Arnold's sighting, because of the sighting over Washington in July '52, just after I was born, the famous shot of the V-shaped lights over the Capitol and over the Coast Guard station. So the government initiated originally, I believe it was, there were Project Sign, Project Grudge, the Condon Report, Project Blue Book, and then they engaged J. Allen Hynek. So, the French, Belgian, Mexican, Iranian, and Turkish governments are not the only ones who address this issue. Our good old USA government has, in fact, seen the necessity to put people's fears or concerns at rest. And as anybody in the field knows, these studies went on, and these studies revealed that, most of the sightings could be explained through conventional means, as either hoaxes or weather climatic things, but many of the sightings were unexplained. And so therein is where lies the mystery in all of this.
Dan, what do you think is the significance of UFO technology? I mean, obviously, these guys, extraterrestrials, can come from one star system to another and visit Earth. I mean, recent headlines on CNN are talking about, and BBC, that we're going to run out of oil in 2026. We've got to get on to a better technology. I mean, to be able to go from another star system to Earth, obviously they have the answer.
Well, the presence of these obviously intelligently controlled machines tells us that we are dealing with beings who have anywhere from 1,000 to 1,000,000 to 10 million to 1 billion years advancement in technology on us. So you've got to figure that look what happened in the last 100 years. We have the Wright brothers at the turn of the century taking off in basically a fabric and wood aircraft. By 1969, we have lunar expeditions. In the year 2004, we have massive airplanes being built out of alloys and graphite, and this big ship that Airbus is building, the new Boeing plane. So in 100 years, from fabric and wood, we've come to, advanced metallurgy, fuel use, and propulsion in just 100 years. Imagine what a culture could accomplish in 1,000 years, or 10,000 years, or 1,000,000 years, or 1 billion years. It's not inconceivable that you have intelligently manufactured and controlled machines that can not only traverse great distances in space by mastering gravity and the time-space continuum, but also the interdimensional travel that might be possible. Many theories now purport that there were not only 4 dimensions at the creation of the entire multiverse 14 billion years ago at the time of the Big Bang. There were 11, maybe as many as 21 dimensions. So some of these beings may be coming from an extra-dimensional place. I mean, and what it says is that these technologies have been harnessed, and that it's possible to use other fuels that don't rely just on simple combustion. And there are many theories. I mean, some theories are that the military already knows about these forms of propulsion and lighter than air vehicles or metals that can be vibrated to a certain point where they become light waves, photons. But they're not telling us. They're not going to reveal that, obviously, to us, and we just have to keep the search going. So I think that it's incumbent on us as a race on this planet to begin to find alternatives to the fossil fuels, but we're just not doing it fast enough.
It's probably been the greatest and most successful cover-up in the history of the world. UFOs are as real as the airplanes that fly over your head. That is my unequivocal conclusion.
Oh my God.
The Avro Arrow story, Dan, I mean, you appeared in a movie about the Avro Arrow story. Canada broke the sound barrier. Diefenbaker dismantles the whole aerospace program in Canada, and all the engineers are hired by NASA and Boeing down here, and we finally break the sound barrier. But in Canada today, we have another scientist, Canadian scientist John Hutchison, is using wave induction, using Van de Graaff and Tesla coils and radio on a 75-pound cannonball. We can see this huge cannonball levitating in the air. I mean, Boeing, NASA, Lockheed, all of these defense contractors are going up into his lab in Canada and trying to understand how this thing works, because the next person or the next country that figures out true anti-gravity propulsion systems is going to be king of aerospace on this planet.
The Hutchison effect incorporates radio frequencies, Tesla frequencies, and high electrostatic energy to create a type of levitation effect where it can move a 75-pound cannonball of steel or brass bushings, water, wood, and other objects into the air.
Are we doing enough in our universities, in our research labs? Are we putting enough money into this kind of a research? And what risks are we willing to take if universities in Beijing and China and Russia, they're actually going into the UFO phenomenon in their universities? But here in America, mainstream science, mainstream physicists laugh at the UFO phenomena. I mean, what do you think about that?
Budgets are tight all around the world, and as far as putting money into the study of alternative technologies, funding research by people like Hutchison, the money is just not there. I mean, if you look at NASA, NASA is getting chopped back because the funds that are flowing through government now are focused on the war in Iraq and other things. So we don't even have the money to keep up conventional space exploration, development of metallurgy, fuels, ion drive systems. So I don't see any government in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years really putting the money into the kind of research that's needed to develop these alternative systems and to perhaps study what is driving these intelligent machines from somewhere else. Now, of course, that's on the visible side of things. We're hearing a lot about these special access programs where congressional money is approved by a very narrow slice of the membership in the legislature and given to the military to do basically carte blanche what they want with. So there could be a black military program that is producing what people are referring to now as the big black deltas, which are these huge black triangles that are being seen all around the world, the big black rectangles, which are also being seen all around the world. So maybe they look a little like this. The F-117, they look a little like the B-2 bomber. Maybe these are special access programs that have been applied to alternative technology.
And that it is time that world governments officially acknowledge.
I don't see them revealing, these the sources of these programs, nor their applications right now.
Okay, I worked in the U.S. space program for 36 years. I was a contractor employee, first working for McDonnell Douglas and then ending up working for Boeing after McDonnell Douglas was purchased by Boeing. I started at the end of the Mercury program and then worked the whole Gemini program. And during Gemini, I was responsible for the design of the equipment for the life support system. And so I had a distinct interest in keeping astronauts alive and having successful equipment. During the program, when we were flying the Gemini spacecraft, my interest in UFOs became very real. It became real because, first of all, Gemini 2, which was unmanned, it was rumored and talked about among our researchers that 2 UFOs had followed Gemini 2. And then Gemini 2 was, of course, recovered later. And I didn't think too much about that except, yeah, that's kind of funny. Very interesting stuff. And then when Gemini 4 flew, and its 4-day mission, 66 orbits, with James McDivitt and Ed White, about halfway through the mission, McDivitt said he has something up here with him.
Astronaut Gordon Cooper is an American hero with a log of over 222 hours of manned spaceflight. He had a long and illustrious career of service to his country. With over 11,000 hours of flight, he was a fighter pilot, U-2 test pilot in the Air Force, and is one of the first men to ever fly in space. He orbited the Earth 22 times in Phase 7, the last of the Mercury missions, on May 15th and 16th of 1963. On August 21st of 1965, he orbited the Earth again on Gemini 5 and remained a backup for Apollo 10.
Well, I've had some occasions to know some of the people who were involved in Roswell at one stage or the other. I think there's been an awful lot of untruths put out on Roswell and an awful lot of conjecture. I think there have been some truths in it. I think definitely there was something other than weather balloon there. Very likely. I'd like to think they reversed engineered it and did something with it, you know, did some benefit with it, which would be the logical thing to do, but I have no way of knowing whether they did or not.
Within hours of the crash at Roswell, U.S. General Nathan Twyman designated the visitors as enemy aliens. It appears from his book that Colonel Corso agreed with that assessment, and that it has remained as official U.S. policy ever since. At that time, however, it was an enemy, quote unquote, about which the U.S. could do nothing, because the visitors were so technologically superior. That led to the recommendation that the discovery be treated with the utmost secrecy, to the point that the crash at Roswell didn't happen and that UFOs don't exist. The rationale was that the ordinary public couldn't cope with the news and might easily panic.
Area 51, Dan, I mean, we hear stories from Bob Lazar, we hear stories about alternative space program theories, you know, we're building UFOs and reverse engineering UFO technology since the saucers crashed at Roswell and the plains of St. Augustine, and we have reverse engineered that technology today. That's the theory, and NASA is just a smokescreen program. If we really have true anti-gravity technology today, why aren't we using it in our military? Why isn't it evident in the war in Iraq? Why don't we use it to demonstrate superiority on the planet? And if not, if all of this is just conspiracy theory and we really don't have this technology, again, are we willing to take the risk of losing air superiority on this planet by letting the Russians or the Chinese or some other country, even the Middle East, actually engineer this kind of UFO technology and conquer the world? Are we willing to take that chance?
Well, I think, as far as military applications, maybe they are being used already. Maybe we don't know. Maybe they're being used in a surveillance capacity. As far as weapons that could be associated with such vehicles, one would have to think that if the propulsion system is as sophisticated as it would need to be to have these vehicles just hover, stop, noiselessly take off at right angles, do 3 to 5 to 6 to 20,000 miles an hour, one would think that the military application would then take the form of, rather than rockets and projectiles, that probably a particle beam would be used, some kind of a laser, some kind of a disabling beam to disable equipment, to cause disorientation among men and troops. And of course, we have seen no evidence of this. I'm not sure that the U.S. military would want to play that card right now, because after all, the war in Iraq really is a conventional war. We have air superiority there already. There is no Iraqi Air Force. There was no Iraqi Air Force. We, in the United States, we have air superiority basically over the rest of the world. I'm sure there's some pretty hotshot MiG pilots in China and Russia. But I think if you put our Air Force up against any Air Force on this planet, we would prevail without the use of advanced technology of the type we're speaking of. So I think that the U.S., if they have these things, they would probably save them for a more drastic confrontation, perhaps a confrontation with beings that have the potential to be superior over us in terms of the applications of aviation today. So maybe these triangles, the big black deltas, the rectangles, are the next wave of the U.S. military's defense against what some might perceive as an extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional threat. Maybe these weapons or these flight systems now are being prepared to confront a race of superior beings that could have designs on the planet that are malevolent. I think it was Lord Hill Norton or one of the British Air Force Defense Ministry staff who was assigned to study UFOs in the 50s. After he retired, he said that in his estimation there were 23 different species of being visiting the planet in numerous types of vessels. We know from the NASA UFO studies that you've done, and I think that theory, there's nothing wrong with that theory that I can see that doesn't point to what you postulate, and that is that there are benevolent beings that are trying to heal the planet. Hence the size of these ships that we're seeing in the STS cameras, and the fact that the ozone has holes in it, the fact that water could be a healing element there. What are these lifesaver-shaped little Dropostone-shaped ships conveying to our planet? Well, we see them coming into the atmosphere, and on the STS tapes and other forms of exposure, they're not releasing personnel, they're not releasing projectiles, and no harm has come to the planet, through their intervention. So one can assume perhaps that maybe there are benevolent beings out there and malevolent beings out there, and maybe the United States government is preparing weapon systems to deal with the malevolent beings. Ronald Reagan said in a speech, he said, what if there were a species from another planet that was threatening us? We would all find a way to work together. And one can only think about the Star Wars system and the fact that there we had satellite-mounted cannon. Well, they'd be good for shooting down rockets. They also might be good for shooting down other invasive vehicles that are coming into our atmosphere. Ronald Reagan himself spoke about a UFO sighting that he had when he was governor of California in the Beach King Air that they used to use. They were coming from Sacramento. His wife was with him, Sacramento to Los Angeles, and a saucer clocked the plane for a good 45 minutes. And Reagan spoke of it to a lot of people. And I think maybe, part of his motivation in getting the Star Wars weapon system up might have been that to prepare ourselves for the day when other beings might come to this planet with designs of, who knows, taking minerals without authorization, taking people. We're probably just going to have to wait to see.
I occasionally think how quickly our differences worldwide would vanish if we were facing an alien threat from outside this world.
Colonel Corso makes it clear that the Reagan administration's Strategic Defense Initiative, appropriately dubbed Star Wars, was primarily designed for use against the alien intruders. His contemporary successor, the anti-missile missile defense system, is also being designed with that as one of its principal objectives. It is true that a case can be made for attempting to provide a shield against the Russians and Chinese, although every everyone knows that the Russians are not going to embark on a policy which would result in their total destruction. It is equally true that they, too, are aware of the visitors and know that the perceived threat from the visitors has been a major consideration in the planning of the anti-missile system.
And the incident in question, as at least from my perspective, almost ignited a nuclear war, and that was 5 unidentified objects were picked up on radar coming in over the Pacific Northwest, Northern California, Southern Washington, Oregon area. As these objects approached the coast, Strategic Air Command went on a alert. We were in a defense condition, or what is referred to as a DEFCON, Defense Condition 3, which means that the nuclear forces were ready, but they weren't on a ready stated alert. We elevated that to Defense Condition 4. Defense Condition 5 is launch. When we went on our alert, the Russians were also monitoring our nuclear armed forces as we were theirs. And so they knew that our bombers had gone to fail-safe. They knew that the launch codes had been given. They also knew that the hatches on the ICBM missiles had been removed and that we were getting ready to do a launch. I know that Nixon, President Richard Milhouse Nixon, picked up the phone and called the Kremlin. The White House notified the Kremlin that these objects were not, and I repeat, not a preemptive launch by us, that they too, the Russians, had been tracking these objects as they came in over the Bering Sea.
Probably moved 100 miles in a matter of a second or two.
When we look at alien abduction, I mean, the idea of a human being being taken and having an implant inserted into their body, I often think of how biologists, how we tag whales. You know, we put a chip on a whale and we can track them via satellite, and also how, you know, we go into a frog's pond and we pull out the frog and we spread it out on the table. Remember in biology class we used to do this, and, you know, stick the little needles in his legs and cut him open. I mean, that's how we look at another life form in another world. So is it really a sign of violence and negativity that an extraterrestrial civilization is coming to Earth and doing the same to us, putting computer chip implants on us to track us, know where we are, study our species, do a little bit of biological experimentation? I mean, I know for us it's horrific. I mean, it's absolutely a violent thing for us as humans, but from their perspective, do you really think that they're being violent?
Well, again, I have to go back to some of them might be here for good purpose.
And that it is time that world governments officially acknowledge
And some are here for selfish purposes. Maybe these abductions, even though they're done in a objective but biological way, like we dissect frogs, maybe they're doing it just for fun and for sport. I mean, I don't know. I think probably that that the fear could be justified in some senses. Anne Druffel has written this book about how to prevent being abducted. And we really think, even if benevolent species coming to this planet and taking a man and a woman and taking ova out of a woman and sperm out of a man, that's tremendously invasive and very traumatic for the human beings. So even if the motives are good, these actions are as violent as anyone we're capable of on the planet. I think that a certain amount of fear is justified. If you look at Day the Earth Stood Still, the first thing that happens is the army is assembled and guns are shot at these beings and at the ship.
addressed the question to Dick Cheney because I say the most important question to put to any high-ranking official is not what do you think about UFOs or have you seen one. The most important question is have you ever been briefed on the subject? Did someone walk in your office and tell you what's going on? Because if someone walks into the president's office or some high-ranking official and briefs him on the subject of UFOs, it is for real. It's not imaginary, as the government has been saying for 60 years. So I asked Mr. Cheney, this is 3 months after he became the vice president, I asked him on the air, and this is still on Diane Ream's archives, Mr. Cheney, in all your jobs in government, have you ever been briefed on the subject of UFOs? And if so, when was it and what were you told? And Mr. Cheney said, if I had been briefed on that subject, it probably would have been classified and I wouldn't be talking about it.
January 22nd, 1997, I noticed 3 amber orbs now at a distance far west on the horizon. And I'm thinking, wait a minute, even though they're in a line formation, they were amber, they were in a formation, they were hovering for minutes. And as I'm pointing like this, they reappear in the same spot. And I thought, I have to get a picture of this. And I ran upstairs, I grabbed my 35mm, get out onto the balcony. As I'm ready to shoot the 3 bottom orbs, suddenly 6 amber orbs in a row, totally equidistant from each other, massive span across, pop up.
On March 13, 1997, over 10,000 Arizona residents witnessed the single most spectacular UFO sighting in the 20th century. Headlines surged the nation, and Arizona residents demanded answers from military and state officials. A mile-wide UFO was seen from as far north as Flagstaff, Arizona, and then the giant triangular UFO hovered above the great city of Phoenix, Arizona, where Dr. Lynn Ketai shot this amazing videotape. When we go out into space and we're exploring the cosmos out there and we're looking for signs of extraterrestrial life, what kind of a communication are we going to send out? I mean, if Dan Aykroyd was the ambassador, if you were the ambassador for Earth, what message would you teletype to ET?
If I were to speak for mankind to these beings that were coming here, I guess what I would say is, you know, let's go to some neutral place. Let's have a meeting with scientists from all around the world leaders. Let's sit down and basically have a sort of a forum with you, the extraterrestrial or extra-dimensional beings. Let's sit down and kind of get to know each other. And, you know, human instinct is pretty good, and I think you know, it would almost like be a sort of a G8 style kind of summit with world leaders, scientific leaders, and these beings, and you'd sit down with them, and you know, after about a week, or even a couple of days, or maybe a few hours, you would really sort of get a sense of what they're up to. But of course, you know, childhood's end, Arthur C. Clarke's great story. It looked like these beings were benevolent, even though they had a malevolent appearance, and in the end, we find out that they meant no good for our planet. So I think it's important that some branches of the military and police be briefed on these in a very real sense, and be told, you know, they are real, people are being abducted, there is mind control in play here, and that we do have to be vigilant. Now, if we knew that there was a purely benevolent race, like if something happened in Iraq where all of the electronics went out in the American military and all of the insurgents' rifles jammed, or we saw all of the polluted waters in North Carolina from the pig farming completely healed overnight, and different signs like this, then we would know we're dealing with a benevolent species, and then we could really be open and welcome. But then again, we would have to be cautious, because beings with that much power could give the impression that they're here to help when really they're not. So the verdict is out on all this. We just don't know which ones are benevolent, which ones are malevolent, and the degree to which they're going to continue interacting with our planet. But what would really help is if the United States military and police and government open it up to their staffs and say, look, this is something we really do have to consider, because, you know, maybe the defense, the survival of our species could well be at stake. If you look at the history, you know, from, say, Ken Arnold's first sighting in '47, going back to the Bible, Ezekiel's wheel, going back to the medieval manifestations of little saucers and UFOs, that painting of the Madonna that's very famous, in which it appears, up to now, there have been no mass murders by these beings. There's been no mass destruction of cities, but hundreds of thousands of people have been taken out of their lives, subjected to surgical experimentation, released back into the population, and are suffering trauma today for it. That is not good.
The idea, I mean, like in the movie Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the meeting on the dark side of the moon in Devil's Tower, Wyoming, I mean, it seems like the logical thing to do. I mean, we have a communication, a teletype message, we have a place, a location, and a time, and we isolate it from the public until we know it's safe. I mean, we check each other out. I mean, this seems like the most logical thing to do, you know, even rather than meeting on the White House lawn. I mean, this is the way we would like it to happen. But that doesn't seem to be the way it's really happening. I mean, these extraterrestrials don't seem to be so interested in doing things politically the way we do things on Earth. They're picking certain individuals to contact. They are zeroing in on those individuals. But now, I mean, there are so many sightings going on all over the planet. I mean, it's just amazing. I mean, Iran, Turkey, Mexico, Venice, California, Sonora, California, Texas, Death Valley. I mean, the reports are coming in every other day now. It seems like we're heading towards an omega point. I mean, what is about to happen? I mean, is this all just a coincidence that more and more people have video cameras, or do you really think, you know, there's a major unprecedented communication that is about to happen between our extraterrestrial visitors and humanity? Or again, is it the video camera question? More camcorders?
There are definitely more video cameras out there, and definitely more sightings, and definitely more credible witnesses. You know, the biggest thing in ufology in the 60s was Herb Shermer, the Nebraska Highway Patrolman, who was at the Ashland Oil tank farm out there in Nebraska, and he writes in his diary, you know, saw flying saucer, and then under hypnosis, turned out that he was taken aboard and informed of their intentions. Barney and Betty Hill. I mean, these were the key cases. Shermer, Barney and Betty Hill, the Pascagoula incident, Travis Walton. Now there are hundreds of cases like this, and I think that because it's in the consciousness, because we have, you know, a poll saying basically half of the world believes and half doesn't. We're reaching a point where, as Stephen Bassett talks about his time clock, it's like the nuclear time clock that we had in the 50s before we blew the world, you know, before we blew the world up. The theory that once the hands got to midnight, that's when all the nuclear weapons in the world would be discharged. Well, we've stopped that nuclear clock, thankfully. But as far as the UFO clock, he says we're 1 minute to midnight now. Meaning that in a minute to midnight, something really, really spectacular is going to happen. Now, whether that's a mass appearance, whether that is, you know, it come over to the Yankee Stadium during a game, I think possibly the next, maybe even in the next 5 years, we're going to have occasions like the one I experienced in upstate New York in the mid-'80s when I woke up in the middle of the night and I said to my wife, they're calling me, I want to go outside, they want me to come outside and see. He said, who? Something outside wants me to come out and say, oh, just go back to bed. I went back to bed, but in the next day in the media, in newspapers, in radio, all over upstate New York and Ontario and Quebec and Vermont, people spoke about this urge they had to go out of their houses at 3 in the morning and look up into the sky. And 12,000 people shared this urge. And they went out, and it was a big, big news story. And of course, the Air Force said that a Chinese rocket had exploded over New York State. And what people saw was a massive, miles-high pink spiral in the sky above the Great Lakes. In Hull, Quebec, Canada, a few years afterwards, there was a story of several hundred people, almost 1,000 people, in this community, Gatineau, north of Hull, Quebec, Canada, in the Quebec province, sharing this urge to come outside and look up into the sky, and they also saw an apparition. So there are going to be more of these mass sightings. And, you know, the day that 1 million people in Idaho at a rock concert or something see it, that is when you're going to really get the conventional military and police sitting down to say, well, it's time to throw the Brookings Institution report out and lay it open to the people and let the people decide, you know, what must be done in conference with our state leaders.
And that it is time that world governments officially acknowledge
national security, and if they did, would they classify it to protect the national security? So I would have to say, no, I couldn't agree to non-disclosure. I really couldn't if I saw something or photographed something. But I can see where other people, you know, wanting to do the best for their country, wanting to serve their country in a legitimate way would say, yes, I will not disclose. And this is based on the Brookings Institution report from the late 50s, which, you know, Congress commissioned, which said that if the existence of UFOs were revealed to the American populace would not be able to handle it. They would defy church authority, police authority, military authority, governmental authority. They wouldn't go to work. They would sort of cast aside the mayors and governors and presidents and go, we want to talk directly to these beings. We feel that these beings should, you know, have their case put to us directly by them themselves. I think the American populace today is ready to handle the concept that what we live in, the 4 dimensions of height, length, width, and time, is not all there is. There are more dimensional realities. There are advanced beings with machines that can skip from dimension to dimension, from galaxy to galaxy, using the Einstein-Rosen bridges, the wormholes. I think the American people, I think half of them know, and I think the other half, with the proper evidence, would be ready to accept it. It's going to take a mass sighting for the U.S. government to finally say, look, we're going to come on side with France, Belgium, Mexico, Turkey, Iran, and we're going to tell the truth, and we're going to reveal what happened to Tom Mantell when he went up in his P-51, what happened in the Great Lakes when I believe it was an F-104, I believe, was scrambled over the Great Lakes in the 60s. What happened to him? You know, I think that that if you have that type of sighting, then there'll be no choice.
Interdimensional travel. I mean, not just traveling through our dimension, but going into alternate dimensions, Dan. Would you, and if you could, a spaceship arrives in your yard, and you know you've got the barbecue out, and there's the steak on the grill, and they want you right now to come with them and go into another dimension, and to move forward and backwards on the timeline, to go forward in time and backward in time. If you could move forward and backward in time, are there any events in human history that you would interfere with, that you would change to alter the destiny and the course of humanity?
Well, I wouldn't want to go back in time and change anything, because that would be a tampering that I wouldn't serve mankind well. Although there are many horrors, of course. Wouldn't you have loved to have caught Hitler as a 15-year-old and have him drown in a river? You know, because then we could have solved the Holocaust problem, and then World War II may not have, well, look, there were 2 guys. There was Otto Dinkel. You ever heard of him? Well, he was an orator hired by the German army, just like Hitler was, to speak If Hitler died, maybe Otto Dinkel would have been the guy that would have gone on with this rabid anti-Semitism and wiped out 9 million people. Of course one thinks of those things, but you don't want to go back in time and play with events, because where we've come to today and the improvements we've made in human rights and in regarding ourselves as sacred, they've come because of the bad things that have happened. Now, if I went into the future, I would want to see where this planet is 300 years from now. Did we make it? Did we make it? That's what I would like to know.
I mean that from my knowledge of the world that I see around me, I think that it is much more likely that the reports of flying saucers are the result of the known irrational characteristics of terrestrial intelligence rather than the unknown rational efforts of extraterrestrial intelligence.
Interdimensionality, again, if you could move forward and backward in time and meet any personality, any public figure, celebrity, or politician, or mystical figure, is there anybody that you would like to sit down with? If you could have lunch with them, or just sit down and talk to them and have a discussion, forward and backward in time.
Oh, I'd love to spend an afternoon with Richard Feynman. Would love to sit down with Heisenberg, and of course, Einstein, Niels Bohr, Max Planck. I'd love to sit with the particulate, the quantum physics guys, because there really is the root of understanding how and why the world is the way it is, and the joy of these studies in antimatter that are occurring.
Everyone you picked is a physicist, a scientist, and I often think about how spirituality and science are merging, how they're kind of coming together. I mean, what ancient civilizations thought of a universe was really the Earth and the Sun and a few planets. And now with the advent of the Hubble telescope, we can see that the universe is far bigger than the ancients had ever imagined. So while science and religion are merging on some ideas, in other areas they're just far off. But to make matters even more complicated, the idea of parallel dimensions or parallel universes, I mean, it's just getting so vast out there. How do you map a multiverse?
I've talked to some guys, they say that fifth dimension, sixth dimension, could be right here by my ear and could be a millimeter wide and a millimeter across. You don't, because you're talking about, dimensions that defy any kind of dimensional understanding. And, there was I forget his name, he died recently, in the last 2 years, but he proposed that there are parallel realities just because of the way we go through time. Like, here we are in this interview right now. Well, what I said and what you said and what we all did 2 minutes ago still exists somewhere. Because we just did it. It's there. It's like a wake we've left. And if you had a time vehicle, you could go back to 2 minutes before and stop and see what we're doing 2 minutes before. You go back to your high school days. You go back to your days as an infant. And those realities are still existing alongside what we're progressing through. It's all a beautiful, beautiful mystery. I am here because I am a writer, a performer. I find it entertaining. I'm not a scientist. And I'm not a theosopher or philosopher. And I am just here because it is enormously, enormously entertaining. And mysteries like this are challenging. And it's really, really fun to contemplate that, there may be beings out there who are concerned about our planet and who may give us the opportunity to advance ourselves. It's really fun to contemplate. All the physics that we know on this planet, quantum physics and conventional physics and metallurgy and all of it, it can really encompass a theory of how these ships move. I mean, you've done it yourself, David, proposing, that if you can convert, a mass to a state of, of photonic energy, then there is no mass anymore, and you're looking at pure light. You're looking at anti-gravity. You're looking at something that can be, harnessed in waves. Well, what is the fuel? Well, people, Bob Lazar talked about, this element 115 that was put into these generators to boil mercury and to be used as gravity tractors. Maybe that's it. I don't know. I mean, they must be using a fuel that's unavailable to us. Does it give off radioactive waste? What is the cost to them? For instance, the Venice UFO that you recently showed me, and I covet that tape. That's amazing. Because you see the metallic quality of the object, you see the force field around it, you see it spinning.
It was May 2nd, 2004, approximately 11:30 a.m. And I was walking from my apartment with my girlfriend down this alley right here. And we were just sort of walking this way, and I looked up over at those phone lines, and we saw something that we really couldn't make sense of. It was a very shiny, metallic disc. So we turned the corner here, and this is basically where we're just looking at it. And we're pretty much like, okay, that's not a balloon or anything we're familiar with. So we sort of kept walking to the corner and just stared at it for a while until it hit me, that this was really something. There was a man also looking at it, sort of a bystander, and he said, wow, do you guys see that? And that's when I realized all three of us were looking at something extraordinary.
What is the environmental cost of running these machines? Are they clean or are they not? Is there some, wherever they came from, is there some place they have to go back to after their journeys are finished to dump whatever they've used up in terms of fuel, like we would a bad fuel rod in a reactor? That is a question I'd like to know. I'd like to ask is, are you a clean burning vessel, or is there some cost that you pay like we paid for atomic energy?
When we consider that it may be possible to take mass and reduce it down to zero, make it as light as a photon, we can start to approach this whole light speed phenomena from a whole new direction. I mean, we're going to be able to do this. This is the only logical answer. There are no fissile nuclear materials in the universe as we know it to produce the kind of energies in a steady stream that you need to get mass up to that speed. There are no fissile nuclear fuels that can produce 1 trillion electron volts all day long. And wormholes are even more exotic. The idea of bending and folding two spaces of space-time together and creating a shortcut wormhole to vector in between those 2 points, according to Kip Thorne, who wrote Black Holes and Time Warps, that the energy required for a wormhole is 100 million suns, the negative energy they put out for an entire year. There are 100 million suns in our galaxy alone. That means all of the negative solar energy coming from our suns in this whole galaxy, the total energy for a whole year is required to create a wormhole. Where has any extraterrestrial civilization or our civilization going to get access to levels of energy that high? It's never going to happen. That's why I've reversed the table here. I said, you have to ultimately get frustrated with the idea of increasing energy en masse. You have to it's like banging your head against the wall and trying to cram it through the wall. You will never be able to do it this way. So the new way, as I propose, is to make this all possible. And when you consider UFOs coming in, stopping on a dime, and then accelerating and turning out into space, any Air Force pilot can tell you that stopping on a dime, the G-forces are going to throw you right through the walls.
Yeah, you'll be crushed.
And then sudden acceleration is going to do the same thing. It's going to destroy the body of the pilot. So this new approach and this new idea, I mean, this is just the inception, it's just the beginning, but I think this is really the only avenue that we can look down right now, and the only way we can see solving this problem. While Gordon Cooper was an Air Force pilot stationed in Munich, Germany in 1951 in the 86th Fighter Bomber Group, where he flew F-84s and F-86s, Cooper testifies to having chased disc-shaped UFOs that outmaneuvered the most advanced fighter jets of our time.
We were flying in Germany, and we were flying F-86s. And they would come over and do the same maneuvers that we make, except every once in a while one of them would go zip. And you just can't do that in a fighter, a conventional fighter. They're just typical saucer shape, double lenticular shape, metallic looking. Well, yeah, they weren't just random. They were flying fighter formations, very definitely under positive control.
I'm here to announce that the second annual Exopolitics Expo, X-Conference 2005, was concluded on Sunday, April 24th. This event was produced by Paradigm Research Group. 26 speakers and panel.
And that it is time that world governments officially acknowledge.
It was a unique event which focuses on the political, governmental, and social implications of extraterrestrial-related phenomena. It is produced by PRG as part of the emerging activist movement seeking to end a government-imposed truth embargo regarding extraterrestrial-related phenomena.
Do you believe, and describe, do you believe that your show was shut down for national security reasons? And tell us a little bit about what happened with the show out there.
Well, what happened, we sold the show to Sci-Fi Channel, and it was called Out There, and I basically interviewed all of the people that I admired in various fields of study, like Colin Andrews from the Crop Circle movement, Linda Moulton Howe, the expert on cattle mutilations, John Mack. And let me just put a pin in things right there, because John Mack has taken the study of abductions, UFOs, right out through the other side, and he's going, yes, we know they're here, we know they're coming, we know people have been taken, we know there's experimentation going on, we know people have been told about agendas. What we now have to do is use that as a key and as a motivation to socially transform this planet to a more peaceful, more loving, more tolerant state. So his movement, the movement for social change, has just accepts as a fact abductions, UFOs, interplanetary intervention, and what he's doing is taking it out through the positive side of it and saying, now we must use it to socially transform. And I think his message is great. But I talked to him, I talked to the Allagash guys who were taken in the canoe on that trip in Pennsylvania. The last show we did, I had both Bassett, who has the UFO time clock, and then Greer. Both Bassett and Greer were there. They were my two guests for the day. Well, the show was canceled that afternoon. And I was outside, before I knew it was canceled, in between the interviews. And I was outside, and Britney Spears called me because she wanted me to appear on Saturday Night Live with her. And so I was outside having a cigarette, the phone rang. Oh, Brittany, how you doing? Oh, sure, of course I will. I turned away like this. I turned back, and there was a black Ford across the road, a black Ford sedan. And I was trying to look at the plate, and the plate seemed kind of like fuzzy, and I was, definitely a police car. And two guys were there, and a big, big, tall guy got out of the back seat, and he stood in the street on 42nd Street it was. We were at 42nd Street and 8th Avenue, and he looked right at me. And literally, I was on the phone. Hey, oh, sure, of course I'd love for the show. Saw the Ford, went back like this, turned back like a half second later, and it was gone. And that car did not go past me. It did not make a U-turn, because I would have seen 42nd Street. I would have seen that thing take a U-turn and go away. That car vanished. That car was a cloaked vehicle of some type. And whether this was like a warning to me, because the guy got out of the back seat, gave me a real dirty look. That car vanished. I know what I saw. And you know, it was just this fast. It was, oh, hi, Brittany, sure. Oh, of course, I'd love to. Guy gives me a dirty look. Oh, well, sure. Car gone. That's what happened. And then 2 hours later, we were told we were not to continue taping, and the show was canceled, and none of them would air. I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Was that an MIB experience? You know, black helicopters. You know, military abductions that happen. Sometimes people are taken, and they talk about then being visited by, you know, military personnel and debriefed about their abduction. Was it, you know, was it a technology associated with some of these beings that are visiting that wanted to warn me off, or that wanted to give me verification that I was on the right track? I don't know. But I do know I did turn back a second later, and you know, it takes so long for an automobile accelerating from 0 to 40 miles an hour to reach the corner of 8th Avenue and 42nd Street going past me, and then pulling a U-turn and going out towards Times Square. I would have seen that car. And I looked around. I mean, I was looking for that then. It was gone. So, I don't know. The tapes exist. I have them. We're going to try to repackage them. We might put them out on DVD.
I was having some cameramen film the installation of a precision landing facility we were putting in right on the edge of the dry lake. And this saucer flew right over them and put down 3 little gear and landed out on the dry lake bed. And they went out to, picked up their cameras and moved on out toward him filming. And he lifted off, put the gear back in the well, and climbed out at a very high rate of speed and disappeared. And so while I was going through all the regulation books and finding out the number to call in Washington to report it, I had them go over and develop the film. By the time they got back with the developed film, I was on the higher and higher and higher level officer talking to me. Finally with the colonel telling me to you know, when the film arrived at my desk, to put it in the carrier pouch. There would be a courier there at my office by that time already, and they'd arranged for him to fly in our base airplane back to Washington with these films, and do not run prints, etc., etc., etc. We didn't have a chance to run it. I had a chance to hold it up to the window and look at it. It was certainly good film. Well, by this time I was involved in the research and development and doing very classified programs myself, you know, at the test center. So I knew that we didn't have any vehicles of that kind, and I was 99 9/10% sure that the Russians didn't have any of that type either. So it certainly was, at that point in time, there was no doubt in my mind that this vehicle was made at some other place than here on Earth. Yeah, well, Buck Rogers and Flash Gordon coming true.
Dude, I got it, man.
Probably moved 100 miles in a matter of a second or two.
In July of 2002, right here in the Washington, D.C. area, there was yet again a airspace jet chase by 2 F-16 jet interceptors, charged, which were chasing a bluish object right outside D.C. In fact, we have one of the key eyewitnesses here in this room today. This received some play in the Washington Post and a little bit of mainstream media, then of course fell into the black hole of the media, never to be discussed again. What were these objects that were able to outperform F-16 interceptors in a post-9/11 America? What is going on?
And what are the consequences, or the potential consequences, in the event that we should shoot down a few of them? A related question that I have been asking myself is, to what extent are they really an enemy? What crimes have they committed against humanity? They have certainly upset the military by flying over their most secret installations, by shadowing their planes, and by buzzing their astronauts.
The Army shot 1,430 rounds of anti-aircraft fire at the UFO between 3:12 and 4:15 a.m. Army Chief of Staff General George C. Marshall wrote a top-secret memo to President Franklin D. Roosevelt that the U.S. Navy recovered an unidentified craft off the coast of California. The retrieved craft was in fact not earthly and in all probability of interplanetary origin.
I mean, to me, what this is all about is not just, looking up in the sky and saying, wow, there's another UFO, yet another sighting. I mean, it's about exploring the phenomena. We have to get past denial. I mean, everyone is stuck at denial. I mean, mainstream science says the phenomena is not happening, and they don't take it seriously, and they try to sweep with them half the world. But over 50% of the American population, according to polls, believe in the UFO phenomena, and the government just buries it.
Well, there's some media that are guilty of trying to suppress, and there are some media that are just throwing the story out there. Now, this Mexican sighting, we had coverage on Fox, we had coverage on CNN, and in the Daily News in the Valley here, we had a front page article, with the pictures and UFO, big question mark, and I mean, they were treating it. I think increasingly now, the media has to take into account that this is a reality. And I think, again, to go along with the theory and the feeling that John Mack has, let's get past the debate whether they're here or not. Let's start to analyze who they are, how many of them are there, what kind of systems they're using, what their intentions are to us here on their planet, and can we utilize this knowledge to better ourselves as a species.
With the advent of the Hubble telescope, I mean, when you see how big it really is out there, and the idea that we're stuck on this myopic little ball, we're just glued to it, we can't get our eyes off of it. It's more of a mystery now than it ever has been. Why we're stuck here, and there's got to be a way to decode the matrix and finding out how these craft work, how we can get out into the universe ourselves. I mean, I think that's what this is really all about. It's not about trying to prove it whether it's right or wrong. It's like when the first time man saw a bird fly.
Well, the last UFO symposium conducted by MUFON, they sent me the book of the speakers. There were many, many scientific people in there, many astrophysicists, celestial mechanics experts, metallurgists, people who've been consulted on these cases over the years. No, I mean, when you have John Callahan, an ex-FAA supervisor, saying, yep, they're real. When you have John Schuessler, who was a Boeing engineer, now running MUFON, and saying, yep, they're real. When you have, pilots and personnel in the police and military coming forward in the Rockefeller Report and in the Disclosure Report saying they're real. When you have a Belgian general on television showing you a tape from a fighter which is filming an object escaping at high speed, when you have this Mexican case, I think we can pretty well put it to bed and say, yep, they're here, they're doing things to us, with us, interacting with us. Whether we've had, official military contact, again, that goes into the black box area, but there should be no debate anymore. UFOs exist. They are intelligently manufactured and guided technology from somewhere else, not this planet.
While human beings can only see from red to violet wavelengths of light, the infrared and ultraviolet spectrums are invisible to humans. I quickly learned that NASA uses special video cameras that are capable of seeing into these invisible spectra.
The tether has broken. It is going away from us. Get it on the TV, Claude. Please get it on the TV.
After the 12-mile-long tether snaps, several days later on an orbital pass, the cameras find something that should not be there. In the NASA STS-75 tether incident of March 1996, we find NASA using ultraviolet light-sensitive video cameras. This is where some of the largest UFOs ever caught on videotape have been captured. Huge dish-shaped luminous UFOs swarm the tether. We know the tether is 77 to 100 miles away from the cameras on the shuttle. The UFOs pass behind the 12-mile-long tether, so we can therefore use the 12-mile length of the tether to measure their minimum diameters. Some measure between 1 and 3 miles wide, making them literally motherships. In Project Blue Book files, UFOs with these same features have been reported several times as shiny metallic discs with dark centers. Specifically, in the invisible infrared, Trevor James Constable, a retired World War II radar operator from New Zealand, has photographed many UFOs with the same features, translucent discs of light with dark centers. And that it is time that world governments officially acknowledge
The time has come to lift the veil of secrecy and let the truth emerge so there can be a real and informed debate about one of the most important problems facing our planet today.
So how do people respond to Dan Aykroyd when he talks to them on a personal level about UFOs?
You know what? It's interesting. When I talk to people, well, first of all, people ask me about it. They come to me and they say, oh, well, you know, we saw an interview, we heard an interview, they heard the thing on Art Bell that we did. They come to me and ask me about it. So it's not like I have to go out there and crusade and say, hey, did you hear about the latest Mexican case? They've seen CNN, they've seen Fox, they've seen the Daily News. They come to me and ask me about it, and I basically lay out, you know, my thoughts on it. I'd say half the people that I speak to about this have either seen themselves, heard about it from a credible witness, or are willing to accept. The other half, totally not. Harold Ramis, my good friend and collaborator, does not believe, will not accept until, you know, hard proof is presented to him in the form of, you know, something tangible. And so what I've been able to do is just open people's minds a little bit and let them think about it. And of course, the greatest proof are the kinds of tapes that now exist, the kind of videos that exist. Usually when I show some tape of some different things that have been exposed to me, well, it's pretty convincing. And then at that point, people have to go away and accept that, you know, that these things are a part of our reality. Well, what I'd like to, you know, what we'd all like to affect is some positive change in the world and try to help the tipping point where good tips to overflow evil in the world. I mean, you know, we know there's good and bad out there, yin yang, black, white, you know, there are you know, there's tremendous divisiveness in the planet, and you know, perhaps this study and this understanding of things that are greater than we have accomplished technologically will lead us to a spiritual awakening, one that helps us respect other beings out there in the universe and other dimensions, and also in our own 4 dimensions and here in the physical world that we live in. The sacredness of human life, the willingness to get along a little better, to relinquish materialism and territoriality in favor of a more comprehensive worldview in which we unite and we all feel the energy within us as part of a universal light.
Where it can move a 75-pound cannonball of steel or brass bushings, water, wood, and other objects into the air.
Are we doing enough in our universities, in our research labs? Are we putting enough money into this kind of a research? And what risks are we willing to take if universities in Beijing and China and Russia, they're actually going into the UFO phenomenon in our universities? But here in America, mainstream science, mainstream physicists laugh at the UFO phenomena. I mean, what do you think about that?
Budgets are tight all around the world, and as far as putting money into the study of alternative technologies, funding research by people like Hutchinson, the money is just not there. I mean, if you look at NASA, NASA is getting chopped back because the funds that are flowing through government now are focused on the war in Iraq and other things. So we don't even have the money to keep up conventional space exploration, development of metallurgy, fuels, ion drive systems. So I don't see any government in the next 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years really putting the money into the kind of research that's needed to develop these alternative systems and to perhaps study what is driving these intelligent machines from somewhere else. Now, of course, that's on the visible side of things. We're hearing a lot about these special access programs where congressional money is approved by a very narrow slice of the membership in the legislature and given to the military to do basically carte blanche what they want with. So there could be a black military program that is producing what people are referring to now as the big black deltas, which are these huge black triangles that are being seen all around the world. The big black rectangles, which are also being seen all around the world. So maybe they look a little like this. The F-117, they look a little like the B-2 bomber. Maybe these are special access programs that have been applied to alternative technology.
And that it is time that world governments officially acknowledge.
I don't see dimensions. So some of these beings may be coming from an extra dimensional place. I mean, and what it says is that these technologies have been harnessed and that it's possible to use other fuels that don't rely just on simple combustion. And there are many theories. I mean, some theories are that the military already knows about these forms of propulsion and lighter than air vehicles or metals that can be vibrated to a certain point where they become light waves, photons. But they're not telling us. They're not going to reveal that, obviously, to us, and we just have to keep the search going. So I think that it's incumbent on us as a race on this planet to begin to find alternatives to the fossil fuels, but we're just not doing it fast enough.
It's probably been the greatest and most successful cover-up in the history of the world. UFOs are as real as the airplanes that fly over your head. That is my unequivocal conclusion.
Oh my God.
The Avro Arrow story, Dan, I mean, you appeared in a movie about the Avro Arrow story. Canada broke the sound barrier. Diefenbaker dismantles the whole aerospace program in Canada, and all the engineers are hired by NASA and Boeing down here, and we finally break the sound barrier. But in Canada today, we have another scientist, Canadian scientist John Hutchison, is using wave induction, using Van de Graaff and Tesla coils and radio on a 75-pound cannonball. We can see this huge cannonball levitating in the air. I mean, Boeing, NASA, Lockheed, all of these defense contractors are going up into his lab in Canada, and trying to understand how this thing works, because the next person or the next country that figures out true anti-gravity propulsion systems is going to be king of aerospace on this planet.
The Hutchison effect incorporates radio frequencies, Tesla frequencies, and high electrostatic energy to create a type of levitation effect.
And one time I had this long conversation with Dan Aykroyd about UFOs, and I thought it was like Einstein was hiding inside of a comic genius, just so that if he told us the real truth, you wouldn't have to believe it. If Einstein had told us UFOs were real, would we have believed him? He never spoke about it. But Dan Aykroyd speaks about UFOs as if he were a full professor on the subject.
So Dan, how did you get started in UFOs? What sparked your interest? What was the first thing that you can remember that happened to you that made you, ponder the question?
Well, I was born in July 1952, and I guess about maybe when I was 8 years old, I found a magazine, a Life magazine, with a picture of the UFOs from that sighting on the cover, with a big inquiry. What are these UFOs? And so that kind of started it as a kid, and I asked my parents about it, and they actually couldn't tell me what they were because they didn't know. They knew there was some mystery there. Then I saw The Day the Earth Stood Still as a kid, and I mean, that was a film that directly related to maybe some of the motives for visitations from other planets. And it certainly seems accurate today if you look at the way mankind in the last 100 years has basically started to turn this planet into a cinder. 3-4 holes in the ozone layer because of industrial production around the world, nuclear testing, wars. I'm just sure, just in theory, if there were another species in the universe monitoring us or near us, they would be very interested in what we're doing to this planet's atmosphere, and to possibly neighboring bodies. So there would be a concern there. And I think that in terms of the extraterrestrial machines that are coming and going, that may be a part of their motivation.
We've just had a rash of sightings all over the planet, and we've got Iran and Turkey and Mexico. I mean, it seems like we're being invaded by UFOs. Let's talk first just about what's actually happening out there.
Well, recently, the most dynamic sighting that we've seen, because it's corroborated by an actual government, is the sighting that took place over Mexico recently, where drug surveillance twin-engine turboprop plane was at altitude taking pictures of possible smuggling routes, and put people's fears or concerns at rest. And as anybody in the field knows, these studies went on, and these studies revealed that most of the sightings could be explained through conventional means, as either hoaxes or weather climatic things, but many of the sightings were unexplained. And so therein is where lies the mystery in all of this.
Dan, what do you think is the significance of UFO technology? I mean, obviously these guys, extraterrestrials, can come from one star system to another and visit Earth. I mean, recent headlines on CNN are talking about, and BBC, that we're going to run out of oil in 2026. We've got to get on to a better technology. I mean, to be able to go from another star system to Earth, obviously they have the answer.
Well, the presence of these obviously intelligently controlled machines tells us that we are dealing with beings who have anywhere from 1,000 to 1 million to 10 million to 1 billion years advancement in technology on us. So you've got to figure that look what happened in the last 100 years. We have the Wright brothers at the turn of the century taking off in basically a fabric and wood aircraft. By 1969, we have lunar expeditions. In the year 2004, we have massive airplanes being built out of alloys and graphite, and this big ship that Airbus is building, the new Boeing plane. So in 100 years, from fabric and wood, we've come to advanced metallurgy, fuel use and propulsion in just 100 years. Imagine what a culture could accomplish in 1,000 years, or 10,000 years, or 1,000,000 years, or 1,000,000,000 years. It's not inconceivable that you have intelligently manufactured and controlled machines that can not only traverse great distances in space by mastering gravity and the time-space continuum, but also the interdimensional travel that might be possible. Many theories now purport that there were not only 4 dimensions at the creation of the entire multiverse 14 billion years ago at the time of the Big Bang. There were 11, maybe as many as 21. They photographed with their infrared cameras 11 unidentified objects. Some of them were in pairs and in threes, and of course, these were objects that couldn't be seen by the naked eye, but were visible on the infrared cameras. Well, the United States Air Force, after the news appeared in America, and it was covered on CNN and Fox. The footage was shown on Fox. It was shown on CNN, and in the Valley Daily News on the front page had a big headline, UFOs with a question mark, and it had pictures from that sighting. And of course, the United States Air Force had to respond, and they said it was swamp gas. So I don't know whether swamp gas is not visible to the naked eye and visible on infrared, whether it comes in multiple balls, whether swamp gas is capable of doing a complete circuit around an aircraft and then taking off at high speed and right angles into the sky. If it is, then maybe it was swamp gas. But somehow this seems to be a legitimate one, because the Mexican government decided we want to release this to the world. And this follows on the heels of the Belgian general who revealed some F-15 footage years ago of his Air Force planes chasing objects that were exceeding them in speed by twice again what his planes were going at. The French government over the last couple of years has released a comprehensive study on the UFOs. The Soviets have been since the 1950s engaged in numerous studies about landings, abductions, and the sightings. So we do have legitimate government inquiry going on, and in fact, as anyone in the field knows, the United States government for years has been covering this issue because they were compelled to cover it, because of Ken Arnold's sighting, because of the sighting over Washington in July '52, just after I was born, the famous shot of the V-shaped lights over the Capitol and over the Coast Guard station. So the government initiated originally, I believe it was, there were Project Sign, Project Grudge, the Condon Report, Project Blue Book, and then they engaged J. Allen Hynek. So, the French, Belgian, Mexican, Iranian, and Turkish governments are not the only ones who address this issue. Our good old USA government has, in fact, seen the necessity to